So in this video, I'm going to give you my non-spoiler review of Transformers: The Last Knight. And I can tell you this much, I at least stayed awake into this one. Hey guys, I'm Lavin, and I review movies to help you manage your expectations so when you walk out of the theater, you're not left disappointed. And real quick, why don't y'all jump in the comment section below and let me know what you think about Michael Bay. Should he direct the next Transformers film, or should this be his last one? So Transformers: The Last Knight is Michael Bay's 5th installment in the Transformers franchise. It follows Mark Walhberg's character of Cade and his band of Transformers as they begin to track down some kind of ancient artifact that has connections not only to our history, but also to the Transformers history as well. Okay, so the last time I tried watching one of these movies, I actually fell asleep. So the simple fact that I was able to stay awake this time is already an improvement. But I didn't just want to go into this movie and stay awake. I wanted to find something good I could talk about. So when I was watching it, I was pleasantly surprised by a couple of things. So let's start with something simple. If you pay close attention to what's going on in the background, you might catch an Easter egg or two to some of the earlier Transformers movies. And if I'm completely honest with you, I have to say when I saw those moments, they did make me smile just a little bit. I also have to give Michael Bay credit. Say what you want to about the franchise as a whole, say what you want to as him as a director, but the guy knows how to direct action sequences, and that's largely what this movie is. It is large action set pieces, and he treated them really well. There is one performance I want to mention just real quick. There's an actress by the name of Isabella Moner that's in this movie. She plays a character by the name of Isabella that Mark Walhberg runs across early on. Now, she doesn't have a lot of screen time, but I have to say she was one of the few characters in the entire movie that I felt any kind of emotional connection to. And the sequence that she first shows up in is by far my favorite part of the entire movie. So that's about all I got when it comes to positives. So let's just talk about negatives for a second. My biggest complaint about this entire movie is it feels like a lot happens, but not a lot matters. I'm tempted to actually say it's slow, but it's really not slow. It's filled with so many action beats, it doesn't feel slow. The problem is the plot itself is very simple, so it doesn't take up a lot of screen time. So what you end up doing is progressing the plot a little here, a little there, but those two moments are divided by 30 or 40 minutes of completely irrelevant material. The effect that ends up having is you end up with a movie that feels very fragmented and disjointed. Let me give you an example. The girl Isabel I was just talking about, that character, as much as I loved her performance and loved what she did, she's completely irrelevant to the story. She has about 20 or 30 minutes of screen time, and if you take that 20 or 30 minutes out, it doesn't change anything. And her character isn't the only one that feels a little irrelevant. There's also some soldiers in this movie, and it feels like the only reason they're there is to provide pressure on Mark Wahlberg's crew so that every time they find out a new piece of information, they have to run from one place to another with someone else on their tail. And they're not even the only ones doing it. You also have the Decepticons that are chasing them down as well. So I can't help but wonder if this movie would have mattered a little bit more if they would have consolidated some of those purposes into a single character. Mark Wahlberg's story arc is a perfect example of this. The title of the movie actually comes from what happens with his character, and yet most of the time it feels like he's just along for the ride. Laura Hardick's character is the one that really drives the plot forward, and I can't help but feel like if they would have just consolidated those two characters, this movie would have had so much more meaning. This movie also is just way too long. The last 30 or 40 minutes, I was completely checked out, and it was just because at that point I didn't care. I had no emotional connection to any of these characters. You know, there are a couple of moments where it felt like they were trying to develop some kind of emotional connection, but oftentimes they would step on it. They never really gave those scenes time to breathe, and they didn't really add anything to the story or to the characters themselves. It was almost as if Michael Bay was just kind of going down a list, checking off things that he felt like needed to be in the movie. The character relationships also suffer. At one point, you'll have two characters that can't stand to be around each other. The very next moment, you find them treating each other like family. They can't stand to be away from one another, and there's no real reason for that dynamic to have changed. There is one character I have in my notes listed as Mr. Plot Device because he pops up a couple of times in the movie, but he's completely irrelevant all the way up until the very end. The very end, he gives a crucial piece of information and you realize, oh, this is the whole reason he was in the movie. And that's how they treated the human characters. So you can imagine how poorly they treat the Transformers. You know, early on in this franchise, they actually took time to give these Transformers personality and develop their characters and the character relationships. And I feel like this movie could have really benefited from some of that that. But they just take it all for granted. They know you're connected to Bumblebee. They know you're connected to Optimus Prime. None of the other Transformers matter. They're just cannon fodder. Now, I try to stay away from internet criticisms. I try to come up with my own, but there is one that kept floating around with these other movies that I saw in this. One of the criticisms I saw from a lot of other reviewers concerning a lot of the other Transformers movies is that the Transformers really aren't on screen all that much. They make the movie more about the human characters and less about the Transformers themselves. And when I was watching this, there was one part where that became very obvious to me. In the last act of the movie, there is a big action sequence. There's probably 5 or 10 minutes of that action sequence where you don't see any Autobots. They are noticeably absent. So all in all, there was just a lot I really didn't like about Transformers The Last Knight. It's way too long. The characters are underdeveloped. The plot is super simple, and it's filled with irrelevant material. So if I'm going to give it a score, personally, I would give it a D. And as always, if you made it to this point in the video, you must have liked it. So why don't you go ahead and give it a thumbs up? Jump in the comment section below and let me know your thoughts on Michael Bay directing a new Transformers film. And make sure you hit the subscribe button on your way out so you're kept up to date next time I get ready to upload a new video.